Hey everybody, welcome to Zone Talk, episode 5. We're here today with Dr. Marco Caravaggio. He worked as a chiropractor. Please tell us more about yourself.
Just me personally. So I'm a father, I'm a husband. So I have one child, and my wife Nancy has been my partner, and our son is Joseph. And I've been back in Toronto. We'll get into this in a bit, but I've been back into Toronto about 11 years after I was in another country for a while, and we'll get into that for a bit. That's about me.
And business-wise?
Business-wise, so I run what's called the Network Family Care Center, which is I'm going to call it a hands-on wellness practice, because there's myself as the chiropractor, but I also have 3 registered massage therapists in the clinic as well that do work with us. And so we take care of people in a hands-on fashion naturally to try to improve everybody's health. And we have a family-based aspect to it, which I'll get into at some point.
Oh, and so I know we're all under quarantine and lockdown.
Yes.
So what's the biggest challenge for you personally and business-wise?
Yeah, so obviously just the fact that we're only allowed to see emergency patients. And so, my profession is putting my hands on people, and obviously we're not allowed to do that right now, which is very challenging for these times, right? It's especially challenging for me because that sort of human contact and connection is such an important aspect of what I do. And just sometimes for the health and psychology of some people, just having somebody touch them is very, very important for how they feel. We just know that touch is an important thing. So that's the biggest challenge I have, is because it's such an important aspect of what I do, is actually physically touching people. And just the fact of touching people is important for their kind of health and well-being as well. So it's kind of challenging that I know my patients on the other end are suffering because, they're not getting the contact that they need and the help that they need. And then I can't provide that. So that's a very challenging thing right now.
And what's the definition of emergency patient?
Well, it's basically somebody who has something that's limiting their daily activities. Like if somebody's maybe they've hurt their neck and they have like debilitating headaches, or they can't really raise their arm very well, or they can't grab onto something, or their back hurts so much that they're having difficulty walking, or getting up and going around, or something like that. So things that kind of impede their activities of daily living. Or it's something that's very severe that, like, if they're not seeing us, it'll get worse over time, because some people have chronic conditions that won't necessarily ever get better. But if they don't get consistent care, that condition will get worse. So those are we consider those emergency patients.
Okay, and so I know that your technique when it comes to chiropractic is a little bit different than a regular. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the technique, it's basically called the network spinal. So it's gone through a lot of different iterations over about the last 20 years or so, 25 years. But it's basically it's a light force technique. And the concept was, the guy who came up with it, he's a chiropractor from New York. And he said, how can I do the lightest and least stuff on a patient that'll get the most impact? And so he was kind of looking at a lot of different techniques that had a lot of different similarities. And he said, how can I network them all together and do something very light that'll still get the same impact as opposed to doing like the fast, quick kind of maneuver. And so over time, he's kind of saw that different touches in different spots and very specific spots on the spine can trigger the brain to pay attention to the spine and the nerve system. And the person actually starts to develop strategies to be self-correcting. So often people on the table might breathe into areas that are tight, or they might spontaneously move muscles. They might not even be aware of these little twitches or movements or little repositioning things that happen. But over time, the brain learns how to become more aware of the spine and releasing tension on its own, and becoming more resourceful in its strategies to be self-correcting. And the biggest kind of thing that attracts people to the care, one of the biggest things, is there's a lot of people that know they should be taking care of their spine probably, but they might be afraid of like the more heavier stuff, right? So this technique kind of attracts the people that maybe don't want to get their neck cracked, so to speak, or they don't want the heavy pushing. So this technique is really good for that whole section of people. And there's actually a lot of people who have had that other technique that have kind of said, it helps them for a little while, but sometimes they notice that the stuff kind of recurs a little bit and they don't feel like they're progressing. And network has different levels of care. So people actually progress through different levels of actually looking for different changes and strategies in their spine, how they think about what they're feeling and things like that too, as they go through the care, which is kind of interesting.
So does the technique evolve as time goes on?
Absolutely. The guy who came up with it, basically, they're always doing testing and studying. And just for an example, when people are in the first level of care, which we call basic care,
Mhm.
the touches are very light and brief. And they were actually testing people. They were putting something called surface electromyography on their spine. So they had these electrodes all down the spine of somebody. And the human body, there's a word we use in biology, we call it, should be a non-linear responding, meaning it's not just like you put in an input of 2 and you get a response of 2. You should have like a bigger response when you do something good for the body. And he was finding that after he had people on the table for a while, after about like a month and a half in the care, the response was starting to plateau. So he said, you know, I actually have to do something different to kind of wake the brain up. So he started putting people on their side to unbalance them a little bit, or sitting them up and bringing them back, so that the different parts of the brain would have to engage to start paying attention again. So he started developing these levels of care. And those levels have changed over time, and how we position the people and things like that. And he's just found that doing the research, and they have these guys that do these mathematical modelings and looking at the wave and stuff, and they say, okay, I can see the wave is here, so when you do this contact a little higher, a little harder, it's better, the response. And so he's been studying with university researchers, you know, looking at these people, and have these guys that do like, you know, quantum mechanics and all this kind of stuff, looking at it and seeing how we can improve the touches and how the touches are done to continually improve the response of the people, which is kind of interesting. So,
And
and it gets old. There's always something new to learn every year.
so how did you get into this technique?
Yeah. So if we go back into my history, so I graduated from the Canadian College here in Canada, and then I went to Italy, which we'll get into later. But while I was there, 2 different people, my best friend from chiropractic college had mentioned this. He goes, you know what, I went to see this technique and it's really amazing. And he was raving about it. He says, if you ever know that it comes to Italy, make sure you go check it out. And then while I was in Italy, there was a chiropractor there who, he's from Austria, but he came to Canada to study, went back to Italy, and he's studying practicing with his wife in Italy. I met him for lunch one day, and he goes, Marco, there's this technique that's going to revolutionize chiropractic and it's going to change the world. And he was all gung-ho about it too. And I said, okay, well, 2 people telling me about it, I guess I should go check it out. So when I found that Donald Epstein, the guy that invented that, he was coming to Como in the north of Italy, I said, let me go check it out. And so I liked it for 2 different reasons. Number one, because he was showing a lot of research, like university research that they were doing on the technique. And then I watched him do the technique on people. And it was very interesting because he put somebody up on the table who had never had the technique done on him before. And he says, okay, I'm going to do this contact here on his lower back. But he says, look up here at his neck and watch what happens. So he did a little contact down on the guy's base of his spine on the sacrum. And the guy started moving his neck spontaneously up there, and that's what the contact was for. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see that. And so when I do the technique on little babies and children, I can see, you know, when I do the touch in the right spot, I can actually see a response very specifically in the spot where that contact was supposed to tell the brain to pay attention to that part of the spine. So that was really cool.
That sounds really amazing. So what's the comparison difference between your technique and traditional chiropractic technique?
Yeah, so in chiropractic, I always tell people that it's not necessarily better, it's just different. And just like in massage therapy, for example, there might be like 100 different massage therapy techniques. There's hot stone massage, there's deep tissue massage, there's reflex, you know, different kind of ways. And so there's a lot of different ways of chiropractic kind of doing the same thing, which in the end is helping the body be balanced and heal itself better. So obviously traditional chiropractic, when people, you mention to 100 people on the street, they say, where's the chiropractor good? They say, well, he cracks your back or he cracks your neck and he's good for
Yeah.
neck pain or headaches. But and we kind of categorize the techniques into 3 categories. So we call them segmental, tonal, which is my technique. Tonal means it's just like it's a light technique that might just be in the upper neck for some people, or in light spots in tonal, meaning we're trying to change the whole spine by doing light things in specific areas, as opposed to just pushing on the spot that might be stuck and the body needs help in that area. We want the whole system to kind of be self-aware and organizing it. So technique wise, it's obviously lighter because this, like, you know, pushing on a you know, testing the ripeness of a tomato is about how hard the touches are. So it's obviously not the quick cracking thing. And it's also just like, it helps the body develop strategies that usually don't happen with the other technique because the chiropractor is doing it for you or to you. In this case, I'm helping the body do something for itself. That's kind of the bigger differences, I would say.
So, can you tell us a little bit more? I know that you work with children on the spectrum and special needs patients.
Right.
So, how do you help them?
Yeah. So one thing we always preface this by saying we don't treat any conditions, right? So I don't treat like autism. I just treat, people that have things in their life. You're trying to help everybody in similar ways by helping the body be more balanced and heal itself. So I've had an interest in this pretty much since I graduated. Actually, even while I was in school, I was interested in
Hmm.
pediatrics just because I thought it was a really important thing to help kids grow healthy, as opposed to trying to fix a broken adult sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so right from school, I was already studying the pediatric aspect of chiropractic, and I continue to do that. And so in chiropractic, there's a there's a program called the Carrick Institute, which they help chiropractors do something called functional chiropractic functional neurology.
Hmm.
And people that have come to my clinic, we do these funny tests with your eyes closed, and we might spin people and make them march on the spot and things. We're trying to analyze where the nervous system might need some help. So spectrum children, they might have different areas of their brain that we call them decompensated, meaning they're not working as good as they should be or at their optimal potential. And so we'll try to find those weak spots of the brain and do specific stimulation to try to bring that part of the brain up to functioning as well as it can for that person.
Hmm.
So if there's a certain area, like a lot of times spectrum children, they have a difficulty feeling their body. They don't feel where they are in space very well.
Hmm.
And so doing the touches that we do, we might do deep pressures, we might do figure eights, we might do quick little pulls on fingers and things to send stimulation to the part of the brain that might not be as active. And the more we try to do that, then the more they become more aware of their body. And when you're more aware, it's really important to know where you are in space to feel centered and grounded. And a lot of times, spectrum kids, they're kind of all over the place because they don't have that center. And so helping the spine move correctly helps to stimulate the brain in certain areas and make sure that it can be functioned and as balanced as it can for that person.
Hmm.
And there's some things that we look for, like in children that have, almost all children on the spectrum will have something called a retained primitive reflex. So these reflexes that babies have to kind of keep them alive to survive the first year of life. But then after the brain starts to develop, those reflexes should go away and change into, we call them postural reflexes.
Okay.
But if those primitive reflexes are retained, it usually hinders the brain development to go past that certain point. So it mentally, or not, just certain parts of the brain are still stuck at like a 1-year-old development. And if that doesn't get passed, or we say integrated, then it's hard for the brain to continue developing to the higher levels. So we check for these primitive reflexes on the babies, and we try to do integration exercises. So I might give the parents to say, your child has a retained moral reflex or an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. This is the exercise you need to do with the child at home to try to integrate that reflex so the brain can get past it to keep the development going. And that's a big thing that we do in the office as well.
And so, is there any success stories that you can talk about?
Yeah, there's quite a few actually. So a couple of ones. So different. I'll go for a younger person and an older person. So when I was in Italy, there was a lady who had an autistic child. He was actually 18 years old, and he still had to wear a diaper. So he
Oh, wow.
wasn't, he just was still, pooping in the diaper basically. So there's a concept, as I was saying before, feeling where your body is out here is important. There's also knowing the sensations from inside your body too. So there's something called interoception, meaning that you're aware that when your bladder is full, you have to go pee, you can sense that. So a lot of times if they don't sense the outside of their body, that same interoception isn't there either. So they don't even feel the signals from inside their body. So that lady, she started care with me in the office, and she kind of understood what I did. So she says, can I bring my son to you? So, he was a bigger guy and, autistic. He wasn't verbal or anything. But after about 2 months of care, she said he actually went to the bathroom on his own, pulled down his pants, and he pooped in the toilet by himself. And she said he started to become aware of that and started doing that on his own from that point on, which is really kind of interesting. And then here in Toronto at the office here, there's one child that the parents brought the child in just at around the beginning of spring.
Mm-hmm.
And so this child was doing spinning behaviors. He would bang on things, make a lot of noise, screaming
Yeah.
around, and biting. He was biting kids at school and doing a lot of pushing and things. So we saw the kid over the course of the summer, and then when he went back to school in the fall, all the teachers were like, what happened to this kid? He's not pushing anymore, he's not biting anymore, you know, he's a little caught, he's not spinning as much, and all sorts of things. So his you know, just the quality of life, a couple of things happened because he was getting ABA therapy downstairs, and they would say that they would never stay down there. He would always run upstairs where his mom was, about maybe 15 times in the 3 or 4 hour session that they were doing these ABA sessions, which are trying to, that's like a therapy they do for autistic kids. So then after I'd seen him for a month and a half, they said he stopped running upstairs, he stayed for the whole sessions, and so they were able to help him better too. So we always say it's like it takes a village to take care of these kids, right? So I have this one little specific niche kind of thing that I do, and it can kind of help some of the other professions if they're doing speech therapy or ABA. If the child is calmer and more centered and they can focus better, then the other people can do their things to help the child as well.
Of course, that sounds excellent. So you work both in Italy and Canada. So
Yeah.
as culturally speaking, as a chiropractor, is there a difference between the culture?
Quite a bit. So Italy's culture is very family centered, and just like the culture in Italy, when I went to Italy, there was probably only about maybe 250 chiropractors in the whole country. And there's probably 250 chiropractors in my neighborhood here in Maple, right? So they're very few and far between. So in Italy, when the public finds something that they think is good, they really stick to it, and they're really good for referring people. So in Italy, like the word of mouth was really good, you know. So I was like, there's this thing in Italy where they kind of have a thing like their local doctors, they sort of don't look on them in high regard sometimes. So if you're a doctor from another country, you're looked at the big guru kind of thing, right? So in my region, I was called the Dottore Americano, even though I'm from Canada. They consider Canada and America the same thing. So he's go see the American doctor, right? That's what they were saying. So in Italy, they're very, very loyal too. So it's very common in Italy that because it's hot in the summer and they don't like air conditioning, everyone just takes August off, right? So it was normal for me to take the whole month of August off, come back in September, and everybody's still there. It's not like they go do something else. They just expect doctors to do that, and they expect that because they do it themselves, right? So vacations are very important. You know, downtime is really important. It's a different kind of feel in Italy. It's getting, you know, unfortunately, the North American vibe is getting in there and kind of infiltrating it a bit. You see more McDonald's and bad food and that kind of stuff getting in there. But the concept is that they like family, they like togetherness, and they're very loyal too. So when they find a good resource, they talk about it a lot.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was a really nice environment for sure. And obviously, you know, I was like 15 minutes from the beach and about an hour from a mountain. So, you know, you could go skiing or you could go to the water.
And so and then you move back to Toronto and then start the clinic. So
Yes.
there a huge change?
Yeah, it was quite a bit. Yeah. So because I was in Italy, couple of things. I wasn't, because there's so few chiropractors, I wasn't able to find somebody to buy it, my practice. So I just kind of had to close it, which is very devastating for all those people that were counting on me for so many years, right? Yeah. But luckily, after about a year, there was a guy from another town that kind of took some people were kind of going to see him, and that was fine. But coming back to Canada, just different because I was coming back to a city that I didn't live in. I bought the practice. The best thing I could do is buy a practice off somebody who was retiring. So when I came back, I did we call it a locum, where I was just kind of like working in somebody else's practice for a while until I found somebody that was retiring. And luckily, there was a guy retiring that did my technique as well, which is super fluky. But after about, I can't remember, 8 or 9 months that I was here, I was able to purchase that guy's practice. Because if I had to start a practice from scratch, not knowing anybody in a town, that it would be very, very difficult. Like just the way the environment is, and there's so many already, and how do you make yourself stick out like that and try to attract a lot of people? It would have been difficult.
Is a word of mouth important in here as well?
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of funny because sometimes you always have this kind of rhythmical thing with patients, and sometimes you'll just get somebody that's like a connector, right? So just recently, there was a Filipino nurse practitioner that started in my practice, and they have sort of like their own kind of community too, and all of a sudden 6, 7, 8 of her relatives and other colleagues were all going, and she just happened to talk to me either at a school function or in the hospital where they worked or something, and all of a sudden I got a whole pile of them, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
that word of mouth is important, for a number of reasons, just because they know I care, and they can kind of see that I'm a compassionate doctor and all that kind of stuff. So, and that they like the technique, that it's light, and they know that it's not going to hurt anybody, and so people are good to send their moms or their grandmothers to me and that kind of thing as well. So that the word of mouth is important, especially kind of for the technique, because there's a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to go to a chiropractor. He says, oh, but he does a light technique. Okay, let me check it out then. So that part of the word of mouth is important.
So I know that before you're a chiropractor, you into a lot of Super 8s and animations.
Yes.
Are you still doing any of those?
Not really. I mean, I'm right now, I'm interested in kind of doing it on the computer, I guess, right? So I'll do animations for my videos on that kind of thing. And, I actually found when just in the end of the sort of Super 8 era, they were converting Super 8 movies into DVD. So I got all our Super 8 movies converted. So I have all our old movies on a DVD, so I can see us, when I used to have hair, we were playing in the backyard, shooting guns at each other and running and doing stunts and animating our GI Joes. And I used to do plasticine models, and I would make them animate and run and play the piano and play guitar or something, or have these monsters fighting each other. Or I used to animate the walkers from Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back. I would animate them on the sand and that kind of stuff. So I have a few of those, and if I get time, I'll upload those to YouTube and kind of share some of those things maybe sometime.
That's great. So eventually the lockdown will be lifted. Do you think there will be any regulations or rules from the city that will affect your practice?
It's hard to say. I think it'll be kind of like, probably in 2 years from now, we won't even know what happened. But in the interim, there's going to be like a little bit, okay, they might limit how often people are, just when they're starting, they might say, okay, you can only see a certain amount of people, or you can only see one person at a time. And there has to be time between each person to clean and things like that. That's all possible, but it's all government stuff, so we'll see. But in the meantime, of course, we're taking all the precautions like we normally would. Like we always clean the tables anyway and keep everything clean like we usually do, right? So we do that all the time anyway, but, we'll see.
You also have a YouTube channel, talk about all the techniques and healthcare.
Yeah.
Can we talk a bit more?
Sure. So I think it's about 3 years ago now. Just as far as a chiropractor, I just had like a coach that was kind of talking to me about my practice and stuff. And he goes, you should put out some health information weekly to keep your patients informed, because I get the impression that you like teaching people, but you don't always have the time to do it. And so he just kind of challenged me. He says, why don't you make a video every week? And I said, wow, I'll never be able to make a video every week. Forget it. I probably run out of things to say after about 6 or 7 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And so that was 3 years ago, and now 3 years later, I think I have over 300 videos on YouTube now that range anywhere from a couple of minutes to maybe 10 minutes on health topics that just kind of come to mind, things I might be reading or exercises to do. Sometimes I just show some recipes. I make some stuff with my son on a funny video, and we show them how to make like a wild blueberry pie or something. And so I show healthy recipes. Sometimes I talk about the technique, so I might do different videos on, why do you always touch the right side when I'm on the table when my left side hurts, or something like that.
Okay.
Is there any exercises to do for your neck if your neck is bothering you? So I've come up with different things. So the 2 videos that my most popular video, the number 1 most popular video I have, which has thousands and thousands of views now, is how to stop a calf cramp within seconds. So that one's got the most views. And the second most popular video is on the symptoms of a hiatus hernia, meaning that your stomach is popping up above the diaphragm and causing like indigestion, lump in the throat, heartburn, gas, burping, difficulty digesting, that kind of thing. So those are my 2 most popular videos that I have online.
And also we're gonna link your channel underneath in the description as well. So before we go, one last question. So a lot of people are stuck at home. What's your Netflix recommendation for everybody?
Yeah, so for me, just because I kind of like science fiction and I've always liked it, the show Lost in Space, which is one that I used to watch when I was a kid sometimes, and I kind of knew about it.
Mhm.
So I watched it, and it wasn't, first season was okay, but I just found the third season that they have now, the production value is really, really good. So like it's almost cinematic level special effects for a TV show, and I was very, very impressed. Like there's all this stuff with like they were on a planet that had a lot of water, and the
Mhm.
sets look pretty big, and the production value of the show might not necessarily the best show, and it's a little bit predictable and that kind of thing. But just as far as the production value and appreciating how much effort they put into the show, that's one of my favorite ones right now.
That's great. Thank you for talking with us today, and hopefully everything will turn back to normal soon.
All right.
All right.
Thanks for the interview.
That's it.
Bye. Thanks, Ben.